The state legislature is in for a big shakeup after the November election. Earlier this month, both House Minority Leader T. Ryan Lane and Senate Minority Leader Greg Baca announced they wouldn't seek re-election. Those moves added to a growing list of legislative seats to be filled by voters this year. It now stands at 19. 12 of those seats are held by Republicans, the other 7 by Democrats. The potential for a statewide political shakeup might seem huge, but how competitive are those districts really? I try to answer that question in our next segment as I sit down with former State Senator Dee Dee Feldman. We'll also try to nail down why there's so much turnover this year and the ripple effects it could have leading into and after this fall's election. I want to thank Democratic former State Senator Dee Dee Feldman for joining me on the show this week. We, of course, know her quite well here on New Mexico in Focus, and this week we're going to lean on her political expertise a little bit more broadly as we take stock of some of these departures from the state legislature that I just mentioned. Thanks so much, Dee Dee.
Thank you, Lou.
Now, 19 legislative seats are open as we cruise towards the election in November. Can you remember a time where there's been this much turnover in one single election year?
Well, that sounds like a lot, doesn't it? 19, that's almost 20%. Well, I look back and found out that it is not as big as you might think, because in 2012, which is the year that I retired from the New Mexico Senate, there was 20% of the legislature that retired at that time, and 11 people in the Senate. So that's more than this year. It seems more noticeable, I guess, just because it's happening now, but that was a big change too. I don't know, the difference now, it seems like they're not just retirements, but they're also younger people are retiring for various reasons. Some because of politics. They were paired. Greg Baca, I think, in the Senate was paired with another Republican. Okay. And others just because it's so hard to be a legislator now if you're a single mom or if you're a working person.
Sure. Now, some of the coverage around the mass departure has left the impression that the balance of power could be in question. Based on the research that you've done and what you know about these districts, is that framing accurate, do you think?
No, I think that it's kind of you would think that with open seats there would be more chance for the minority party to gain. But it's not always true because it depends upon how the map is drawn. And I've looked at the 11 vacant seats in the House and 10 in the Senate. Of those, only 2 or 3 on either side. I think 2 or 3 on the Senate side and maybe 3 or 4 on the House side are swing seats that could actually go either Republican or Democrat. So, so it's likely that there won't be that much partisan change. And remember that the vast majority of the people that are stepping down this time are Republicans, and they are in safe seats. So it's most likely that a Republican will take their place and not a Democrat. So, and the same is true for the Democrats. For example, Gail Chasey, that's a solidly Democratic seat. So you don't expect a Republican pickup there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, purely from a political science perspective, let's talk about how competitive the New Mexico legislature is and how that plays into the decisions from these lawmakers to outright leave or just decide not to run for re-election.
Well, the national organization Ballotpedia says that the New Mexico legislature is not very competitive, even when you factor in the large number of contested primaries. But what that boils down, and it's about 30% competitive, and that's not very good, and it's getting worse. It's getting worse since 2010. I think it was their first one, and you can measure that also by the number of open seats. There are open seats, but they're not contested or competitive open seats. So it's not very competitive. The seats you would think would be competitive because there's no incumbent. See, that's the conventional wisdom, that when there's no incumbent, then it's more competitive for the opposition party. But when the lines are drawn by the legislators themselves to protect the incumbents, whether they be Democrats or Republicans, then the turnover is much less.
Okay.
Much less.
What's the impact of a lack of competition, both for the electoral process, but also for the social discourse and the political discourse in our state, for the public who are watching these races and trying to get ideas in their heads?
Well, just consider this, Lou. In the Senate, for example, this year, there are 11 or 12 seats that are completely uncontested in either the general or the primary. And in the House, it's even worse. 37% of the seats in the House have no opposition in either the primary or the general. Well, in other words, they're shoo-ins, and they're shoo-ins because they're safe districts. So what does that do to the general public, this lack of competition? Well, it makes you less likely to vote. Who wants to vote? And if the results are preordained. And also, it makes people less likely to want to run for office. So, it's harder to recruit candidates to run in a seat which they know they will lose, because the registration edge of Democrat to Republican is such that they can never rise above a certain level. So, it's very discouraging. And what it does, I think, is it diminishes civic engagement across the board. People don't feel that they have power to change things in Santa Fe. And so therefore, why should they participate in those issues, in those elections?
Okay, now you mentioned this briefly, but primary elections.
Yeah.
What have you found about competition in those versus in the general, and how are those competitive races in primaries rather than in the general? How does that affect political discourse within parties and for voters too?
Well, that's the key question, because that's where the real juice is now. The real juice is in primaries. And while there are a lot of uncontested seats in general elections between the Republicans and the Democrats, there are more and more contested primaries. And that's a national trend. That's not just in New Mexico. So in the Senate this year, 26% of the seats are contested in primaries. And let's see, in the House, I think it is 17% are contested in primaries. So what that means is the debate becomes directed toward the fringes. So in order to get elected in a Republican primary, you have to get those voters on the fringe. And in order to get elected in a Democratic primary in a safe district, let's say like the North Valley, where I was the senator, you have to please those people who are on the fringes, who are also most active voters in primaries. So what does that do? Well, it elects more extreme candidates on either side. And then once they are elected, because they usually face no general election opposition, that makes compromise coalitions much more unlikely during the session. So it sort of makes the partisan divide deeper, and it also, I think, encourages people who are in the minority party, and even some that are in the majority party, to not want to be legislators anymore, because it's too vicious. It's too frustrating on either side to hear the same ideological remarks all the time, rather than the more practical efforts to solve problems that the state faces.
Okay. Now, so we've established we have no reason to believe that Democrats will lose the control of the majority in either the House or the Senate.
I say that. I say that of the open seats,
Okay.
there are not many swing seats. But some of the districts which have incumbents, sitting incumbents, are swing districts.
Okay.
So, for example, the Corrales district in Albuquerque, which has an incumbent there, a Democratic incumbent, that's a swing district. And some of the seats up in the Heights of Albuquerque that have incumbents, I would say Senator Martin Hickey's district, for example, Senator Mark Moore's district, that's a vacant seat. But Hickey's he's the incumbent. That could be a swing seat too. So and also down near Socorro, Tara Jaramillo, her seat will be contested by, the longtime Republican representative who ran for governor and lost. So those seats can be swing as well.
Okay.
So it's not preordained.
Sure.
But
Sure.
if I was to bet, I would bet that there will not be that much change in the numbers in either the Senate or the House.
Understood. And if the majority and the minorities do stay the way that they are right now, what will this election say, or what could this election say about what kind of minority Democrats will have to work with from the Republican side?
Well, the Republicans who win in the general election or in the minority, you should, first of all, you should look at who wins in the primaries.
Okay.
To see how things will shake out during the session, to see who is elected. One trend that's kind of different this year, I think, is the large number of people coming from the House to the Senate. And we're seeing that, and there are 2 House members now that are running for the Senate, Natalie Figueroa and Candy Ezell. There's one House member that is currently in the Senate, Greg Nybert from the Roswell area. And there's Mo Maestas, who was in the House. That's kind of a counter trend that's kind of new. So, you have to factor that in. But, it could be, I think the conventional wisdom is that the Republicans will get more extreme and the Democrats who face primaries. And remember, 4 years ago, a number of Democratic senators were swept out in the Democratic primaries.
Okay.
And so everything could get a little bit more partisan.
Let's stick with the Democrats. Are there any factions forming within the party? I spoke with the state land commissioner a little bit earlier on the show, and she was hoping for an increase in the rate that we charge for oil and gas leases.
Yes.
That got through the House. It was stopped in the Senate Finance Committee. Is that some sort of an example about these more entrenched voices in the Democratic Party coming out on top? And is there any internal ideological fight going on here?
Well, I think that you see in the House some discontent among conservative Democrats with the general liberal agenda there. But I don't think it's going to really carry through to the Senate. I think that when you're talking about the failure of oil and gas rate increases, you really have to look at the power of the oil and gas industry and the contributions they make and the lobbyists that they field on both the Republican and the Democratic side. So that may not be the issue, I think, of division between, for example, liberal Democrats and conservative Democrats.
Okay.
But there are others, gun control, for example, would be one, I think, and abortion. Those two have typically been issues that have appealed to a few, in this case, a few, maybe 5 or 6 conservative Democrats in both the Senate or the House. And that's made it difficult for the majority of Democrats.
Okay, so considering everything that we've talked about,
Yeah.
what does all of this say about the nature of public service in New Mexico? The Legislative Council Service just voted 9-3 to fund a $6 million study on modernization. That, of course, includes paying lawmakers. How would that change many of the things that we've talked about today, from competition to voter interest to ideologies for lawmakers themselves?
Well, start off with the fact that we have so many of the seats now that are uncontested. And that means that people don't want to run. They think that it is going to be a losing proposition financially, and also because they're not going to win. Now, the data about modernization of the legislature says that if you pay legislators, if they have a staff, which they don't really have now for rank and file legislators, then more people will want to run because it'll be more attractive to be a senator and to be a representative. And you won't have to sacrifice your business. You won't have to completely sacrifice your family life. So there will be more people that want to run for office. There will be more contested elections. Will they be more competitive? Well, and will the composition of Republicans and Democrats change? Probably not, as long as the legislature is drawing the lines to protect incumbents. Then that will sort of freeze the map so that even though you have more contested elections and more civic participation, the outcome may not be that different. So it's worth doing for many reasons, though, and many of them boil down to you want to reward public service. You want to make it more humane for people to serve in the legislature during longer sessions where they're not up all night for 3 nights making bad decisions because of that's the way it's set up.
Thank you so much, Democratic former state senator Dede Feldman.
Thanks, Lou.